My mother always said it the same way. Calm. Certain. Like a proverb carved into stone. Money changes people. She said it the first time when I was 14 and got my first paycheck from a grocery store. She said it again when I landed my first real job in my 30s. And she said it again that afternoon, standing in my kitchen, looking at my life with that careful half-smile she used when she thought she knew something I didn't. I remember the exact moment because of the way she said my name. Slow. Soft. Almost pitying. You seem different lately, she said, glancing around my apartment. Not impressed. Not jealous. Just observant in that way that made me feel like a teenager again. More confident. More comfortable. I laughed, because I didn't know what else to do. Is that bad? She didn't answer right away. She picked up my coffee mug, turned it in her hand, and set it back down in the exact same place. That depends, she said, on whether you let money change you. I wanted to tell her the truth then. That nothing about money had changed me. That what changed me was the years of being underestimated. Overlooked. Talked down to by the very people who claimed they wanted the best for me. But I didn't say any of that. Instead, I smiled and nodded like I always had. Because my mother had always been the authority in our family. The moral compass. The one who warned, corrected, and subtly judged. She had raised me to believe that wanting more was dangerous. That ambition needed to be modest. That financial success came with moral risk. And for a long time, I believed her. What she didn't know was that while she was warning me about money changing people, she had already started changing herself. Just not in ways she thought I could see. I grew up watching my mother make sacrifices. Or at least, that's how she framed it. She stayed in a marriage she claimed drained her emotionally for the kids. She worked jobs she hated to keep food on the table. She reminded us constantly how much she had given up, so we could have stability. Gratitude was expected. Independence was not. Anytime I talked about doing something bigger, starting a business, moving cities, investing, she would tilt her head and say, I just don't want you to lose yourself. Lose yourself. What she meant was, don't outgrow her. I didn't realize that until much later. Back then, I thought she was protecting me. The first real crack appeared when my father died. It wasn't dramatic. No shouting. No courtroom scenes. Just paperwork, silence, and assumptions. My parents had been divorced for years, but my mother still spoke as if she were the keeper of family order. She handled the estate conversations. She organized the documents. She spoke to lawyers. I trusted her. Why wouldn't I? When she told me there wasn't much left after debts, I believed her. When she said the house would need to be sold to settle things properly, I didn't question it. It wasn't until months later that I found out the house had been sold below market value. To her sister. That should have been my first lesson. But denial is comfortable when the truth threatens your foundation. By the time I started making real money, I had learned to stay quiet about it. I didn't talk numbers. I didn't celebrate milestones. I didn't mention bonuses or raises. I kept my success small, digestible, non-threatening. I thought that was maturity. What it really was self-protection. Because every time my mother sensed progress, her advice sharpened. Be careful who you tell. People get strange when money's involved. Remember where you came from. Always framed as concern. Never as pride. That afternoon in my kitchen, she sat across from me, legs crossed, hands folded. So, she said lightly, are you comfortable? There it was. Not happy. Not fulfilled. Comfortable. I shrugged. I'm doing okay. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Well, she said, just remember. Money doesn't fix character. It just reveals it. I almost laughed at the irony. Because what she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly imagine, was that I already had the proof. Not of who I was becoming, but of who she was. And I hadn't even shown her the statement yet. The truth was, I hadn't planned on showing anyone my financials. Not my friends. Not my coworkers. And certainly not my mother. For me, the numbers weren't about validation. They were about safety. Freedom. Silence. After years of instability, I wanted a cushion so thick that no one could ever threaten me with guilt again. I didn't get there by accident. I worked weekends. I turned down vacations. I learned skills no one around me understood. I invested early, cautiously at first, then with confidence once I understood the rules of the game. And I didn't tell my family any of it. Because the few times I had hinted at success, my mother's tone shifted. Not openly hostile. Never that obvious. Just curious. How much are you making now? Are you saving enough? Do you think you could help out more? Always wrapped in concern. Always followed by a reminder of how much she'd sacrificed. The first time she asked me for money, she didn't call it that. She called it temporary help. She needed to fix something in her house. The numbers were vague. The urgency was high. I transferred the money without hesitation. She thanked me. Repeatedly. Publicly. She even told relatives how generous I was. That part felt good. What didn't feel good was how quickly it became normal. The next request came sooner. Then another. Always just small enough to refuse feeling petty. And each time, the gratitude shortened. The tone shifted. Like she had adjusted to a new version of me. One she liked better. Still, I said nothing. I told myself this was family. That support flowed both ways. That money was meant to help, not isolate. But something about the way she asked bothered me. Not desperate. Entitled. It was around this time that I started tracking everything more carefully. Not because I distrusted her. Because I wanted clarity. I kept records. Statements. Transfers. Dates. And that's when I noticed something strange. The amounts I was sending didn't match the stories. The urgent repairs didn't get done. The timelines kept changing. And once, by accident, I overheard her mention a trip she had never told me about. A trip funded, at least in part, by me. I didn't confront her. I just watched. What surprised me wasn't the spending. It was the way she talked about money to others. To friends, she framed herself as struggling. Careful. Responsible. To me, she framed herself as deserving. And when I hesitated, just once, her voice hardened. I thought you understood family, she said quietly. That sentence stayed with me. Because it wasn't about need. It was about control. The statement that would later change everything sat untouched in a folder on my laptop. $480,000. Not inherited. Not gifted. Earned. Saved. Grown. I didn't feel proud when I looked at it. I felt calm. And I realized something unsettling. My mother had no idea who I actually was anymore. She still saw the child she warned. The adult she guided. The daughter who needed her wisdom. She had no idea she was speaking to someone who no longer needed permission. The moment came unexpectedly. We were at a family gathering. Casual. Loud. Comfortable. Someone joked about money. About how hard things were getting. My mother sighed dramatically. Well, she said, glancing at me. Some people are doing just fine. There it was. The public signal. The quiet pressure. I felt something settle inside me. Not anger. Decision. I smiled and said nothing. But later that night, as I sat alone, I opened the folder. I stared at the statement. And I knew. The next conversation would change everything. After that gathering, my mother called more often. Not daily, but frequently enough to feel intentional. She asked how work was going. If I was tired. If I was stressed. Then she would slip it in. You're not overworking yourself, are you? Money isn't everything. I just don't want you becoming hardened. Hardened. As if success were a disease. The more stable I became, the more unsettled she seemed. She started offering advice I hadn't asked for. Warning me about friends who might take advantage. Reminding me that relationships matter more than numbers. I noticed she never warned me about her taking advantage. That realization stung more than I expected. Because part of me still wanted her approval. The shift became impossible to ignore when I declined a request. Just one. She wanted help with something non-essential. A luxury framed as necessity. I said no. Calmly. Kindly. Without justification. The silence on the other end of the line stretched. Then her tone changed. I'm just surprised, she said. You used to be more generous. There it was. Not concern. Judgment. That night, I replayed every warning she had ever given me about money. Money changes people. Don't let success go to your head. Stay humble. I finally understood what those phrases had meant. They weren't guidance. They were guardrails. Designed to keep me within a range she felt comfortable managing. The final straw came a week later. We were sitting at her house. She was venting about bills. About stress. About how unfair everything felt. Then she looked at me and said, almost casually, you know, with what you make, this shouldn't even be an issue. I felt my chest tighten. Not because she was wrong, but because she assumed access. I stood up slowly. I need to show you something, I said. Her eyebrows lifted. Curious. Expectant. I opened my laptop. Pulled up the statement. Turned the screen toward her. The number sat there quietly. $480,000. No commentary. No explanation. Just truth. She stared at it. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she laughed. A soft, disbelieving sound. Well, she said slowly, I had no idea. Her tone was different now. Careful. Respectful. Changed. And in that moment, I understood something with absolute clarity. She hadn't been afraid money would change me. She was afraid of what would happen when I no longer needed her. The silence after she saw the number felt heavier than any argument we'd ever had. My mother leaned back slightly in her chair, as if the air itself had changed density. Her eyes moved, not wildly, not greedily, but calculating. Rereading. Reframing. She smiled again. But it wasn't the smile I knew. It was smaller. Controlled. Respectful. Well, she said, clearing her throat, you've done very well for yourself. For the first time in my life, her voice held no instruction. Only assessment. I waited for the lecture. For the warning about responsibility. Or humility. Or how money doesn't define character. None came. Instead, she asked questions. Smart ones. How long had I been investing? Was it diversified? Was I being careful with taxes? She spoke to me like an equal. No, like someone she didn't want to offend. And something in my chest sank. I didn't realize it was that much, she added softly. You never said. I closed the laptop. You never asked, I replied. That wasn't entirely true. But it was close enough to matter. She nodded slowly, processing. Well, she said after a moment, I suppose that changes things a bit. There it was. The sentence she didn't realize revealed everything. Not I see you differently. Not I'm proud of you. But this changes things. From that day on, the rules shifted. She stopped warning me about money. Stopped cautioning me against ambition. Instead, she started talking about plans. Future ideas. Family improvements. Legacy. She spoke as if my success were a shared resource. As if it had always been this way. She became careful with her words around me. Kinder. Measured. She even apologized once, vaguely, for being hard on me in the past. I accepted it. But I didn't forget the timing. What unsettled me most wasn't her reaction. It was how natural it felt to her. How quickly she adapted. As if respect had always been available. Once the number justified it. A week later, she called with a new request. This time, she didn't frame it as need. She framed it as opportunity. I've been thinking, she said lightly, with your financial position, it might make sense to invest in something together. Together. The word landed wrong. I didn't answer right away. I'll think about it, I said. She seemed satisfied with that. But I wasn't. Because the more generous her tone became, the clearer the pattern looked. She didn't respect boundaries. She respected leverage. That night, I reviewed my records again. Transfers. Dates. Totals. The number startled me. Not because I couldn't afford it, but because I hadn't realized how much I'd already given. Not freely, but gradually. Quietly. Under pressure disguised as love. I realized then that showing her the statement hadn't empowered me. It had revealed her. And now, I had to decide what to do with that knowledge. I didn't plan the confrontation. I planned clarity. There's a difference. We sat at the same kitchen table where she once warned me about money changing people. She brought pastries this time. A peace offering. I let them sit untouched. I want to talk about boundaries, I said. Her smile tightened. Of course, she replied. I think that's healthy. She always agreed with concepts. Just not outcomes. I laid it out calmly. How the requests made me uncomfortable. How the assumptions felt unfair. How support had turned into expectation. She listened. Didn't interrupt. That alone told me she was afraid of pushing too far. I never meant to make you feel used, she said when I finished. I believed that part. What I didn't believe was that she hadn't noticed. I'm not saying you did it intentionally, I said. But intention doesn't erase impact. Her eyes flickered. That sentence was new territory. She sighed. Well, she said, choosing her words carefully, family helps each other. I nodded. Yes, when it's mutual. That's when she pushed back. Not angrily. Strategically. She reminded me of my childhood. Her sacrifices. The times she'd stepped in. The familiar script. But this time it didn't work. Because I wasn't trying to earn approval anymore. I'm grateful, I said. But gratitude isn't a lifetime contract. The room went quiet. She had no response ready for that. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer. I just don't want money to come between us. I almost laughed. because money hadn't come between us. It had exposed what was already there. I don't either, I said. That's why this stops now. I told her I wouldn't be funding requests going forward. No investments. No emergencies unless they were real, and even then limited. I expected anger, guilt, tears. Instead, she nodded slowly. I understand, she said. But her eyes told a different story. They told me she was recalculating. When I left, I felt lighter. Not victorious. Just finished. 2 days later, she called again. Different tone. Less warmth. More distance. I've been thinking, she said, about how independent you've become. I smiled to myself. Yes, I replied. I have. Boundaries don't explode relationships. They reveal which ones were already cracked. After that conversation, my mother pulled back. No more casual calls. No more advice. When we spoke, it was polite. Surface level. She stopped asking about my work. Stopped sharing her problems. And I realized something unsettling. Without access, she didn't know how to relate to me. At family gatherings, the dynamic shifted again. She no longer highlighted my generosity. She didn't criticize me either. She just minimized me. Spoke over me. Changed subjects. As if shrinking my presence might restore balance. Relatives noticed. Some asked quietly if everything was okay. I said yes. Because it was. Even when it didn't look like it. The hardest part wasn't her withdrawal. It was grieving the version of her I thought existed. The one who loved without conditions. The one whose warnings were about protection, not preservation of power. One afternoon, months later, she slipped. She complained to a relative about how money changes people. Not naming me. Not needing to. I heard about it later. And for the first time, it didn't hurt. Because I finally understood the truth behind her favorite saying. Money doesn't change people. It removes their excuses. I checked my account that night. Still solid. Still mine. And I felt something I never had before. Not pride. Peace. She called once more after that. Short. Formal. She asked if I was doing well. I said yes. She said good. Then she added, almost reluctantly, I'm glad you're secure. That was the closest she came to saying she was proud. I took it. Because sometimes closure doesn't come with apologies. It comes with clarity. The irony is, the $480,000 statement stopped matching almost immediately. It had served its purpose. Not as proof of success, but as a mirror. My relationship with my mother never returned to what it was. But it became honest. And that was better. She stopped asking. Stopped warning. Stopped managing. And I stopped shrinking. The real change wasn't financial. It was internal. I no longer explained myself. No longer softened my boundaries to preserve comfort. No longer mistook guilt for love. Sometimes I still hear her voice in my head. Money changes people. And I smile. Because now I know what that really means. Money changes dynamics. It changes who feels entitled. Who feels threatened. Who feels exposed. If I had never shown her the statement, she might still believe her advice was about morality. Now we both know it was about control. I didn't lose my mother. I lost an illusion. And what I gained was something far more valuable. Autonomy. So when people ask me if money changed me, I answer honestly. No, I say. It clarified things. And I wouldn't trade that clarity for anything. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this.